Hi everyone! This video is going to go through every use of the subjunctive we know so far. So the first use of the subjunctive that we know is the cum clause. The cum clause means when, and it can take any type of the subjunctive that we've learned. So if you have a present subjunctive in the cum clause, then your main verb will also be present tense or maybe future. So when I am running on the bike path, I see dogs. So it's taking place at the same time as the main verb. If you have an imperfect subjunctive, it's doing the same thing, but the main verb is in the past. So it's either pluperfect, perfect, or imperfect. So when I was running on the bike path yesterday, I saw dogs at that point. If you have the pluperfect subjunctive, however, the pluperfect subjunctive is taking place at a time before the main verb of the sentence. So when I had gone for a walk, then I was deciding to turn left on the bike path. Or a better example might be, when it had already started to rain, I brought in my bike. So something had already begun or had already happened, and then the main tense verb will happen. So pluperfect is before the action of the main verb, which is in the past. The next type of subjunctive that we learned is the indirect command. So here you have a verb of commanding, demanding, asking, seeking, something along those lines, anything that could set up a command. And then the command itself is ut if it is positive, if you're commanding someone to do something, or ne if it's negative, you're commanding someone not to do something. And then you either have the present subjunctive or the imperfect subjunctive. So if your main verb, here the verb of commanding, is a primary sequence, so either present or future tense, you'll have a present subjunctive, so you're commanding someone to do something with the present subjunctive because it has that sense of the future. And then if your main verb is in the past tense, so perfect, pluperfect, or imperfect, you'll have an imperfect subjunctive for the command itself. So you have ut or ne, and either a present or imperfect subjunctive depending on the tense of the main verb for an indirect command. Next use of the subjunctive is accidit or perficio. So accidit means it happens that, and perficio means I bring it about that. So this is a type of effort clause. You are doing something to bring something about. So accidit, you will see, always ends in that third person singular. That's because it's impersonal. It happens that. There's no real subject. Versus perficio, which has that O ending, first person singular, because anyone can bring something about. So it could be first, second, or third person, singular or plural, but this one will always be third person singular, accidit. Maybe in a different tense, but never any other person or number. So it can either have ut for the positive, I bring it about that something happens, or it happens that something happens. Or you can have ut non for the negative, it happens that blank does not happen, or I bring it about that blank does not happen. And then it has either the present or imperfect subjunctive depending on the tense of the main verb. So if accidit or perficio is in the present or future tense, then you have the present subjunctive. If it is in a past tense, so that's perfect, pluperfect, or imperfect, then you would get the imperfect subjunctive, just like we did for the indirect commands. The next use of the subjunctive is in conditions. So here we have the first type of condition that uses the subjunctive. So present contrary to fact, something that is currently not actually happening. So for instance, if I say, if it were sunny out now, I would be riding my bike, it is a contrary to fact because it is in fact not sunny, it's raining, and I am not riding my bike. So both of those things are contrary to fact. So to represent this sort of present contrary to fact, you use si, or the negative is nisi, and then an imperfect subjunctive, and then another imperfect subjunctive. So if it were sunny, first imperfect subjunctive, were sunny, I would be riding my bike. Second imperfect subjunctive, I would be riding. Similarly, we have our future less vivid with the present subjunctive. So very similarly to the present contrary to fact, the future less vivid is something that is not likely to happen. So probably contrary to fact, but we don't know yet because it's in the future. So for instance, if I should get a dog tomorrow, I would be very happy, but since it is unlikely that I will get a dog tomorrow, I am unlikely to be very happy on account of it. So this is the should-would condition, and you use the present subjunctive, so you have C, present subjunctive, and then another present subjunctive, just like we had C plus the imperfect subjunctive and a second imperfect subjunctive before. All right, so the next most common type of subjunctive is the result clause. So we just learned about these a little bit earlier today. So remember that in the first part of the sentence with the main verb, you'll have some word like one of these, and you can remember them because most of them begin with T. So you have tom, tot, talus, or tantus. You might also have seek, ita, adeo, but something along those lines to set up that it's so great, so much, of such a sort, that the result happens. So you have either ut or ut non in the negative, so great that something happens, so great that something does not happen, and then either a present subjunctive or an imperfect subjunctive. Present subjunctive if you're in primary sequence, so you have a present or future tense main verb, and then if you have a past tense main verb, you have the imperfect subjunctive. So if you have a past tense being pluperfect, perfect, or imperfect main verb, you get the imperfect subjunctive. The other type of subjunctive that we learned today is the purpose clause. So here you have ut in the positive and ne in the negative. So if I walk my dog so that he will be happy, I would have ut. If I walk my dog so that he will not whimper all day, I would have ne. So here with the purpose clause, it's very similar to ones we've seen so far. If you have a present subjunctive, you have a primary main verb, so present or future tense main verb. Imperfect subjunctive goes with secondary sequence, so a perfect, pluperfect, or imperfect main verb sets up an imperfect subjunctive. And purpose is doing something so that something happens or so that something does not happen. So the subject of the sentence intends for this purpose clause to come about. What's really exciting about purpose clauses is that sometimes they can have the relative with a verb of motion. So here we have the legates, legati, and the progressi sunt. So the legates set forth, perfect tense here. So because they are setting forth is a verb of motion, which means instead of a normal ut or ne that you would have in a purpose clause, you can have a relative. So that's pretty cool. So the legates set forth in order to seek peace, or so that they could seek peace. But here, instead of an ut, which you would expect with this imperfect subjunctive, you instead have qui, which is agreeing with the legates. So the legates set forth who would seek peace, or so that they might seek peace. So that doesn't happen very often. It's only with verbs of motion, but it is kind of fun and exciting when you see it. All right, along the same lines, there is another type of relative clause that can take the subjunctive, which is the relative clause of characteristic. So in this sentence specifically, we have the pirates are, so there are pirates who are happy. And it has a subjunctive here, which means it's a characteristic. So there are pirates of the sort who are happy, or that are the type of people that are happy. So it's describing a characteristic of some types of pirates. It's not describing these specific pirates. It's not like these pirates are happy. There are some pirates who are of the sort that are happy. It's a general characteristic. They're not necessarily happy at this time, but it's just a description. And the tense of the subjunctive in those situations depends on the main verb. Next, we have quamvis. This is very similar to cum, when cum means when usually, and quamvis means although. But it uses the same type of subjunctives, so if you have a present tense subjunctive, that means you have a present or future tense main verb, and the present subjunctive is happening at the same time. So although he is tired, he is still doing his work, for instance. If you have the imperfect subjunctive, that means your main verb is a past tense, so pluperfect, imperfect, or perfect, and it's at the same time as that verb. So although he was tired, he was still doing his work regardless. And the pluperfect subjunctive means something that has happened prior to the main verb, which is in the past tense. So although he had had a lot of coffee, he was still being tired. So he had coffee prior to the main verb of being tired. Last but not least, we have reported speech. So as you know, in indirect statement, all of the subjects of the verbs become accusative subjects and all of the verbs become infinitives. But for the subordinate clauses, all subordinate clauses in reported speech go into the subjunctive, and the tense of the subjunctive just kind of depends on the surrounding verbs and also the verb of speaking. But it's not as important for you right now because you're not composing Latin just yet. So all you have to know is that if you are in reported speech, so you have those accusative plus infinitive indirect statements, then subordinated clauses, which include clauses like relative clauses or quad because clauses or other types, those will all be now in the subjunctive. So if you see a bunch of subjunctives and infinitives, it's probably because you're in reported speech. So those are all the types of subjunctive we've learned so far. Hopefully this was helpful to you and it'll help you kind of piece together things in your mind. So yes, I'll talk to you all later.